Now, the officials are ready. The fighters are in the ring, and they are ready. So, for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to the DJ Scottos What Why Now podcast, where I'm inviting special guests to ask some questions about their life and success stories. For this week's episode, I wanted to invite another special guest to find out from a graduate of Manchester University, qualifying as an accountant, being a CEO for 25 years, and the secrets to leading Informa from a business worth around £2 million to exceeding about £3 billion. I am really excited to introduce my special guest today. Let's make some virtual noise for Mr. Peter Rigby. Firstly, thank you so much, Peter, for joining on my new podcast. How are you, by the way?
I'm good, thank you. I suppose gradually recovering from the sadness of the last week or so, but like everybody. But I'm fine.
It was a bit of a shock, by the way, because I know the Queen's always been very good with the press and stuff, and most of her sons are not always the best with the press. But it really shocked me how quick it all happened. What did you think about how it went yesterday?
Well, so I mean, I got a couple of views which I think is perhaps relevant to our conversation, but they're only personal views as well. I think continuity. It's interesting with what you're doing, and it's interesting what we did at Informa. Continuity is quite important.
Yeah.
If everything, it's like if you've got a football team, so A, if the team changes every 5 minutes, or B, the manager changes or the coach changes every 5 minutes, it's hard to get that continuity. It's hard for customers or supporters in the case of football to know what's coming next and who do you support. What happens when Ronaldo leaves Man United? We have to get another shirt for whoever it happens to be. I just think the ability to build businesses, lifestyles, lives, families and stuff.
I wasn't fortunate enough at Informa to know you on the day-to-day side of stuff. Peter was fantastic when it came to the sort of the sports side and charity, which we'll come on to a bit later.
So we had our own team, from the UK, and we took it in turns playing either in England or in Europe somewhere. But afterwards, we all mixed with the Dutch and the German lads, and we all got to know each other over a period of time quite well. We played at some great places. Did you play at Reading once?
I did. I was lucky enough, and I've got a little story to tell you about it in a second after you say what you say, because as you say about the matches, they got a little bit physical. But yeah, Reading, I played it a couple of times.
Reading, we played at Colchester United because Paul Abraham got us on the pitch there, who used to play there. We played a half pitch because they were doing something once at PSV, the actual PSV stadium, rather than just in Eindhoven. And then we played, I think the last time I ever played, oh no, it wasn't actually, the next to last time, we played at the old Olympic Stadium.
Yeah.
Which had been knocked back to its one level, as opposed to having lots of stands because they'd moved to the Ajax Arena or whatever it's called now. We played somewhere out in Colchester. I can't remember exactly where we played, not at Colchester United. And it was an internal one. I think it might have been Colchester against London, and it was like a war.
It was. I played that game.
I remember going on for a little bit and thinking, you know what? I was probably 55, and I didn't want to get my head kicked in. Or no, not head kicked in. I didn't want to get hurt playing football because it didn't seem to make sense. And that was the little bit I didn't understand. A bit of feistiness and a bit of enthusiasm, whatever you want to call it. Energy is great, but when it's let's take these guys out, apparently that's not what this is really about.
Well, actually, before I go to the next bit, actually, so there was one guy who played for the, we played against the German guys, and so we've done the alternative against the Netherlands, and then we played the German guys, and we played them at Reading's ground, and what happened was I was really frustrated. I can't remember if we lost, and I took I didn't deliberately do it, but I kind of went through on somebody, and he ended up going off. And he was one of the biggest guys, and that wasn't because I thought I was bigger than him, but he was huge. This guy, anyway, he went off injured, and anyway, I saw him about a year later. And he come up to me and went, "Oh, you? Yes, I remember you. I have not played football since. Thank you very much for your challenge." He was like, I didn't mean to do it. He went, "Oh, okay, but it looked like you did." I was like, no, honestly, like it was just a late challenge. I'm not. And he said, "Yeah, thank you. I have not played since, and you ruined my career." I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I thought, my God, like you say, your former hat comes off, but it wasn't a bad one, but it was probably a bit out of frustration. But with regards to the last thing about football, before we go on, so you obviously were really kind and sponsored our five-a-side matches as well, five-a-side tournaments annually. That was amazing. We'd have like 25, 26 teams.
Yeah, it was really good, wasn't
it? Yeah, it was really good. That was one of the really good things that you were really great of, and especially because we used to raise money for it as well, for the World Cancer Research Fund, wasn't it?
Yeah,
we used to do football.
We did, that was something I firstly, going back to the football, I don't think, luckily, I don't think my team got through to the semi-finals that particular time. But I remember the occasion, and do you know what? When we could, because part of my job was visiting all the different offices, all over the world. When we could, we played some football.
Yeah.
So I played football. We played a tournament one night in Singapore when it was so hot. It was hot in Singapore. It was all action stuff. And that was quite a feisty night. And we played. I think we played one lunchtime in Australia, but we played a touch rugby game,
right,
near the office in a park, and it was great. So I always said when I was going to go, if you can arrange something that didn't just entail going to the pub and having a couple of pints, that would be, we go to the pub and have a couple of pints afterwards maybe, but let's do something that more people can join. And it was always started doing what became known as the banana race. And so it was a charitable race. I dressed up as a banana with a banana suit, and the goal was that people either beat me or I beat them in this race. And we did it all over the world for years and years and years, and raised quite a lot of money for charity, and it was really good.
So I must say, this is fantastic. This is about the 10th year we've run this race. There's more people than ever before. We've always done them for charity. We're doing them not just here in Regent's Park in London, but all over the world. So fantastic, and it's so nice that people want to be involved.
So for those that are watching, so for those, the quality picture's not as good here, but for those who are watching on YouTube and the ones that are listening, basically what Peter was saying was that he would beat the banana, and he would beat most people, but this is us all waiting to catch him.
Used to get a little bit of a start because it was harder running in the banana than it was running with your shorts and your t-shirts on, really.
The great thing about all the things that you did for charity, all the things that you did to bring staff together and people that worked at different locations, there was always a nice little social element to it. What we're going to do now, Ben, I want to kind of go back. First question, really. Where were you born and brought up?
My parents were from Southport, which is about 20 miles north of Liverpool on the coast, where the big golf courses are, like Royal Birkdale and stuff like that. So I was really born in Southport. I was like a late arrival. So my mum and dad were in the 40s-ish when I was born. And my dad had been in the war in the Far East. So I was born in 1955. He was a painter and decorator. He had his own painter and decorating business. So the only thing that became quite obvious is that I didn't want to do that because it was too hard. And whenever I got painting or helping him, I was spilling the paint in people's houses and all sorts of stuff. So that wasn't going to happen. So we never actually discussed it. So because he obviously, although he'd followed on from the granddad, he didn't contemplate that I was going to do that.
Right.
So that was young years, and I went through school in Southport. At that time they still had an 11 plus, so I went to grammar school rather than what was called a secondary modern. So it was before there were even comprehensive schools there, and actually I've always say, this isn't meant to be arrogant, that I don't know whether I'd have ended up in the same place had I not gone to the grammar school. So for me, at least, it was a boys' grammar school. It was, it was good. It wasn't a football school. It was a rugby school. So rugby was part of my life, and still is actually. Rugby and cricket, and I played at school, and played afterwards for clubs, and from there, I think possibly because of my sporting prowess, because I didn't get really great A levels, but I did get to Manchester University and studied economics there, and went there in 1973. I always think how different it is to how a lot of people grow up now. So my aunties and uncles and cousins and grandmas and granddads all lived in the same town.
Right.
So you could see them. You could go. We didn't have a car, so we'd go on the bus to see them, nor did they. Or I'd go on the bike sometimes. And it was Southport, and that was anyway. It's changed a little bit, but by and large, a nice sort of residential town without big industry. It had been very famous at the beginning of the 1900s as a retirement town. It had great facilities, a beach, fun fair, all that sort of stuff. And it was, a place which would have dozens of cricket clubs, and even though it wasn't that big, and football clubs, and these great golf clubs. And it was a place where you'd meet your mates on a Saturday morning or a Friday night, perhaps in the summer, at the park and play football with two jumpers for your goalposts, like everybody remembers. Or play in the streets and do all sorts of things that probably people don't do the same now. But it was a good place. It was not. Being born in 1955 was not that long after the Second World War. It was not long after Queen Elizabeth had been crowned. It was just after rationing had finished, I think, and just after conscription had finished, I think. So, Britain got such a whacking after the Second World War because it was virtually broke. That it wasn't necessarily prosperous. So Southport, for example, had been incredibly prosperous up to the 1930s and the crashes and stuff. Whereas so the Lord Street, which is the great street, still exists. Would have lots of fur shops and that sort of stuff. Real high end. You were allowed to wear furs in those days, of course. But after the war, and really to this day, it's never quite recovered its panache.
Do you have any brothers or sisters? And memories of you both growing up?
Yeah, we were enemies, really.
Okay.
And we're friends now. Enemies is too strong. She's a few years younger than me, and she, I suppose, followed a similar way. She went to the high school, which was the equivalent of the grammar school, and she did really well there, and went to university at Warwick, and retired like me now, married and stuff. So I remember that's by the by. I remember very happy days going to the beach with my mum and dad and my cousins, or going on holiday to places, and the two of us. And it was basically, it wasn't Disney and Alton Towers, but it was more like beach and
it's family memories. It's family memories, isn't it? I was going to come on to that actually. So, but did you know what you wanted to be when you were young? You obviously mentioned about your dad, and obviously he was doing his thing, and that wasn't what you wanted to do, decorating stuff. But did you know what you wanted to be at that age?
The real answer is probably no.
Okay.
I was probably like many people who sort of went with the flow a little bit. Right, what should I do now? Well, I should have gone to grammar school, which I did. Should I go to university? Who knows? But I did, because it was the thing to do, and maybe I didn't know what the alternative was.
Yeah, sure.
Or what else I could do. Interestingly enough, my great passion, I told you about sport.
Yeah.
The great passion, because it was a summer game, it was every day, was cricket.
Yeah.
And if I was never good enough, unfortunately, but if I could have been, I'd have loved to have been a cricketer. I just thought it was perfect, because they didn't earn any money. They didn't have anything to do, some of them, in the winter, but the lifestyle, cricket, I think, is a great game. It still is. It's changed a bit, but I love that. And I once fielded as a a substitute fielder in a Lancashire game.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and actually took a catch.
Thinking about how nervous I felt then, what was it like playing for Lancashire then? And having to like take that responsibility because the one's going to come your way. Did you feel really nervous?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and luckily I caught it. I only had one catch to make, and it was only for, I think it was most of one day because it was when somebody was injured or indisposed. And but it was Lancashire had a great team at that time, and there was some good cricketers around the day I played.
Yeah.
And they were all very nice, and I sat with them and had lunch and that, and salad or whatever. I remember, because that sticks in my mind as something that was slightly unusual in my early life anyway, and I was about 20 or 19. I was really, honestly, without being too boastful, a really good rugby player.
Really? I'd love to see you play. I've never played before.
Played at a reasonably high standard, and I think back to those big. I just think you asked about growing up with my sister, who's Susan, and in Southport, the opportunity to play cricket and rugby and football was there.
Was it?
For everybody. Not golf was a little bit, the big clubs. It was still hard for a junior to play there, much harder than it is now as a junior to go and play golf at a golf club. Yeah. And it was. I know everybody says this. They talk about how the old music is better than the new music. That's in your world, isn't it? But it was sort of idyllic in many ways. It was just I could walk to where I played cricket, which was a county cricket ground for Lancashire. I could walk to where I played rugby, which had county games, but was normally just a club place. I could go to the municipal golf course on the bus. So you could just, there's no, you didn't have to get trains. It wasn't dangerous. There was lots of people doing it, and people who wanted to coach and help you and stuff like that. So it was sort of idyllic, really. Yeah.
So you mentioned your parents earlier, but what impact did they have in your career?
My father probably, my dad, I didn't call him father. My dad, not that much, I'd say. He was supportive, and he was certainly supportive of some of the sports stuff that I did. But he'd been a footballer, and my granddad had been a footballer, and they were good footballers. My dad had played, overseas with the army during the Second World War. So he was quieter about me than anything else. With my mother, I wouldn't say she was pushy, but she really wanted me to do well educationally. I think it was more educational rather than vocation afterwards. I think she probably, but maybe my dad too, worked on the premise: look, get well educated, and then hopefully you've got a chance. She always used to say, if I'd said, "Oh, that's," because we didn't have a car, but I might say, "That's a nice car, or that's a nice house." She said, "Well, if you work really hard at school, maybe you'll get a chance at that." Yeah, it's always stuff.
That still carries on, doesn't it? It's carried on from generation to generation. Even now, I think we all use the old school stuff, and some of it works, some of it doesn't. Some of it go, "Dad, you don't know one does that anymore." Like, come on, like. So, how and when and where did you meet Claire?
I met her at IBC before IBC became Informa in about 1992-3 probably, and we met on an Informa night out somewhere in Covent Garden, but I don't know where. Can't remember. It was quite a drunken night anyway.
Do you know what? Actually, it's really funny. I'm going to say this quickly. Out of the 3 podcasts I've done, and I've asked the same question, I've had somewhere in the West End. I've had Oxford Street, and then you said Covent. So I think that seems to be the area where people found their love.
Very magnetic. No, in my case, it was definitely in Covent Garden. I can be.
That's quite good.
Who would know what the name of the place was? She might know.
Oh, that's great. So you've got 2 daughters. What's the proudest moment been so far with them both?
I don't know. You know what? In a funny way, we've been incredible. We've both been incredibly proud just the way that they've grown up.
Yeah.
And they've conducted themselves generally, and they've become nice good people. I mean, Elizabeth is 23 and she graduated from Cardiff. She's only this summer had a graduation ceremony.
Oh, no.
You know, got a degree, so she's had to miss 2 years. And that was a very proud moment. Victoria missed a year, so she had a gap year before she went. She's at Bournemouth. In fact, she's just gone back after summer yesterday. And she's studying natural history photography, and so she will graduate next summer.
What's it like, Peter, when they, like you just said then, they've gone now to yesterday? So you're one that went yesterday to Bournemouth. When they go, how do you feel when they go? Is it more like, yes, let's go to a party, they've gone again, or do you actually, is it quite like sort of a sad, sort of like proud moment, but you feel a bit gutted that they've left because you've been around?
I think it's proud, but you are gutted, and I mean nothing else. The house is empty.
So Peter, obviously you've got other family that don't live with you. I know you've got your son and you've got some grandchildren. Tell us about them.
So in addition to Elizabeth and Victoria, I'm also very proud to have a son, Nick, who's 41 years old, obviously working by now, married to Becky, and they've got two lovely children, Olive and Bert, our grandchildren. Parents were very sporty, Nick at football and golf, and the kids, they are sporty, good at football, both of them, running, keen mini golfers, but also doing very well at school. So I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud, of course, of Elizabeth and Victoria too.
When I decided that the time had come to retire, and I always thought I wanted to retire on my terms rather than somebody else's terms, you know, so a bit like Alex Ferguson, you know, who left when he wanted to rather than he got kicked out, you know, and he and I might never have been kicked out, nor might Sir Alex, but who knows. But I thought that was a good thing to, I think overstaying your welcome is a bad mistake. So anyway, so I thought, oh yeah, right, okay, so I don't know what I'm going to do actually, and nobody really believes that, but it's true. But I thought Claire and I can travel around and we can just go off for the weekend if we want to, or we can have a holiday, whatever. And then I explained this to her one day, probably after I'd retired rather than before, and she said, "Are you stupid?" I said, "Yes, probably." And she said, "Don't you realise that we've still got two kids at school, and they come home every night, you know, and we have to take them to things?" And I said, "Oh yeah." So, and it was a stupid. Well, I sort of thought I hadn't really. Of course, I knew that's the case, but I sort of thought we could get away with sort of somehow not having to do that.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, retirement was slightly different than I'd planned it to be.
It sounds like Claire's got you back out, not letting you sit at home doing nothing and you know, just sitting there watching Sky TV. But we'll come on to that. Just a little bit about university before we talk about Informa. You said you went to Manchester University. What was it like there, and what did you study?
I studied economics, and I was there for 3 years and got my degree in economics. In the last year and a bit, I concentrated more on finance or accounting, if you like. It wasn't really a long way from home. I mean, Manchester's about 40 miles from Southport, but the only way of getting there and back for me and most people doing that trip was on the train. So, given the previous conversation, you'll understand this. For the first 2 years, I think it was, I went home every weekend in the winter to play rugby for my club.
Right. Okay.
So, and sometimes I go for the weekend, sometimes I go for the day. And as I got into my second year, I tended to go on a Friday night and come back on a Saturday night or Sunday morning, because otherwise I was missing out on all of the fun. And then I think I did that for the whole of the 3 years, thinking about it. So I perhaps in some ways missed out on some of the action, but really as I got more into the life, I spent just the hours it took to play rugby and come back, because I had a great affinity with Southport Rugby Club, which is where I played. It might not surprise you that my career has been littered by being in charge of things.
Yeah.
Right? So at school, I was captain of the rugby team. I was captain of the house and all that sort of stuff. When I got to Manchester, I became what was called the head boy of the house that the hall of residence that I lived in. I think it's called senior student rather than head boy, senior student. So then, instead of going off and doing what a lot of other people did, living in a flat or a house, I stayed on because I was a senior student. So I lived for 3 years in this hall that was right in the middle of Manchester called Dalton Hall. It was a boys' hall. I suppose you show to see people more senior than you, whether they're your fellow students or teachers or whatever, that you've got leadership abilities. I went to an old boys reunion last month in Southport, and this man came up to me, who I'd been at school with and then at university with and in the same hall as, and he'd said, and I haven't seen him for ages, his name is John Seddon, and John said, he said, I've watched you in your career as Informa, and he said, from the minute I met you, I wasn't surprised.
Wow.
So, but it wasn't. I don't think. Look, some people set off to do it, and it's their only goal in life. For me, it wasn't. If it happened, it happened.
Yeah.
And I don't think. I'd like to think anyway. I didn't push for it, but other people do, and they say, look, there's that job. Are you prepared to be? In this, before you was like recruited, are you prepared to be proposed and seconded to be senior student or not? And because we think you do a good job. So that's.
There was one job I did a bit of research on, obviously, Peter, because obviously I didn't know. I knew your Informa past, but not your pre-Informa. But you mentioned that you worked at something called Can Maker, Metal Box and Stone
Metal Box. That was my first job.
Yeah. So what did you do there, and how long was you there for?
I was a junior accountant.
Right.
And when you become an accountant, or when you used to become an accountant, you did two ways. You did articles, so you'd go to somebody like KPMG or something like PwC, or you went into industry. Now, because I'd staggered so far without really knowing what I wanted to do, I chose to go into industry. So when I left university in the summer of 1976, which if you remember, well, you don't, but it was the dead hot summer. So it was a great summer. And I had this job road sweeping in Southport to earn money, just with the gang. And at the same time was looking for jobs. And this job came about in Speke, which is next door to Liverpool, where the airport is. And Metal Box at that time were a huge maker of paper packaging and plastic. So they do fish finger packets, they do yogurt pots, they eventually made the bottles that like big, what they call PET bottles, and the bases that they put them in for Coke and lemonade. They did security printing, and at one time they were the main makers of cans, and metal cans. So we're talking tin cans rather than aluminium cans.
Yeah.
But the tin cans were 2-piece cans, 3-piece. So there's the side and a welded top and a welded bottom, and then eventually everybody learned how to extrude the can to make it into a 2-piece can. So you just extrude it and then stick a top on a top on it. And in Speke we did mainly paper packaging, beef burger packets, fish finger packets, that sort of stuff, and we printed security checks. So what the story was go to Metal Box.
Yeah.
As a sort of a trainee accountant, I think I was. It was it probably cost me almost as much money to get there on the train and the bus than I earned at the time, but it was a kick-off. Then I moved with them I was offered the job as assistant factory accountant for Metal Box. We were all over the world at this time. So this was a job in Swindon, and that factory made plastic, things like yogurt pots, cream pots, stuff like that, in the main, and some bigger containers. So I'm in Swindon. I'm probably 24, so I've left home by then.
Yeah.
Living in a flat in Swindon, working at Metal Box, and after a couple of years there, I suppose then I never thought it this way, but I started to get ambitious.
Right.
So I went to work for WH Smith. Again, it was still as an accountant, and they had a business, a joint venture business between them and somebody called Doubledays, and it was called Book Club Associates. And it was interesting. Just imagine, so this was 1978 or something like that, 9. They were selling online books.
Wow.
Now they were hard copy, but they were obviously they weren't digital books, but they were they were hard copy. So that was my first experience of real big mail order, as for being in a mail order business, a consumer mail order business, and I enjoyed that very much. And then I was offered a job in about the beginning of 1983 in London for a company called Stoneheart Publications, private company, which had some, even then it had a running magazine called Running Magazine, which had been spawned out of the beginning of the London Marathon. It used to be Jogger, became Running Magazine. It had some exhibitions that they'd bought, or conferences really, that they'd bought from IIR, could you believe it, in about that same time. And it had some subscription-based newsletters. So the subscription newsletters was one sort of the business. The magazine was largely advertising led, but it did have some subscribers. And then there was a conference business at all. And that was funny enough, because many of those things continued all the way through to the end of 2013. Really.
1983 was the time that you joined Informa, right?
Well, it was called IBC, but yeah,
IBC.
To all intents and purposes, yes.
So what was your first role at Informa?
I was financial director.
Okay. Right. So and did you do that for the sort of the next 6 years in the same sort of role? Did your role change?
No, I did it for about. So it was a private company. It was quite small. It was just about profitable, not much.
Yeah.
But we did some quite interesting stuff, and then in 1986, it was taken over.
Right.
Actually, I must get this right. In the original name of the company, the company I joined in 1983 was called Stoneheart Publications. That was the private company. And then in 1986, IBC bought Stoneheart.
Okay.
And then the IBC and Informa and TNF Informa and then Informa again with all. I mean, to all intents and purposes, this Stoneheart was most of what became IBC in the first instance. And but when it was merged in with IBC, that's when we got our first public quote. So that was 1986.
Wow.
So I then went in and became finance director of IBC, but having been change your name, but change your company, but the same title.
How involved was you with the when someone like IBC and Stoneheart come together, or we could call it a merger or call it an acquisition? How much were you involved in that that you could probably look back now and see that stuff that could have had an impact on you, how you did other stuff in the future?
Totally involved. It's obviously it's a smaller level than some of the stuff we did later on. Although, you know what, the principles are much the same. You've got to make sure the people bit works and the principles works and the money works and stuff. I think when you're putting a private company like Stoneheart was together with a public company like IBC, you see how some things are just done purely for the owners of the private company, which is fine because it's their company, you know what I mean? But it's maybe it's not always done the way it would be done if they were two public companies.
Yeah.
So, and I'm thinking particularly of the rationale for Stoneheart being sold, that it was because the owner needed the money.
Yeah.
He just needed, to survive, he needed the cash, and
1989 was a big year, right? So before we talk about why 1989 was a big year for you, do you know why 1989 was a big year in the world? There was some big things that happened in the same year. Do you know what they are? In the same year you became CEO, there were some other things that happened in that same year. That's why it's so important.
1989.
Yeah. There was two big things that happened.
Was that the hurricane?
It wasn't a hurricane. What happened actually in 1989, which is why I think it's quite a special year that you became CEO at 33 years old, because
Were you born then?
in what, in 19, yes, I know I'm not young, Pete, but yeah, I'm 76.
Is that one of them?
No, it wasn't. I was born in 76. No, I tell you why it was quite important. It was that a guy called Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. In that was the year.
You've been doing some research.
I have, but also from me and you as kind of like football lovers, Robert Murdoch launched satellite broadcasting in that same year as well. So that year was actually a special year. So if anything, Peter, come away from this podcast and you might be thinking, oh, this guy's going on. You've at least gone away learning something about the year you became CEO.
I know some stuff now.
Exactly. We say you learn something every day, but becoming CEO at 33 years old, how did you feel when that happened, and why was you made CEO? What was the process? Were you just given it?
So it's certainly more complicated than that.
Sorry, I know it is.
No, but so what happened is that we put together IBC in Stoneheart in 1986. Then shortly thereafter, about 1987, 1988, we merged with a group called the Barham Group, and the Barham Group was what they used to call a consolidation. It was sort of like a consolidation of a conglomerate of all sorts of stuff, and we did it. I thought it was, if you'd have said 1968 or whatever it was, 78, we'd have had a different conversation. But it was the wrong time. 1988. It was the wrong time to put two businesses together, so we got into quite a mess. IBC, not yet Informa, Barham, called IBC, and we owed a fair amount of money to the banks, to a number of banks led by JP Morgan, and at some stage along the way, JP Morgan decided that I should become CEO because they thought that was the best way that we'd rescue the business and move it forward, and so in a way it wasn't, I guess if you like, it was forced upon us, but it was what was right for everybody at the time. And for a while, from the late 80s to the early 90s, we were sort of under the control of the banks. What I had the opportunity to do was to, with the bank's help, to restructure the business, because the size of the business as it was there had too much debt, not enough profit, couldn't pay the interest. So so there was a clearing out of the business, getting rid of some of the businesses that didn't fit. There were some design businesses, there were some printing businesses, there was ad agencies, there was everything you could imagine that had come in with this conglomerate of Barham. But there was other stuff that did fit, so it was a matter of getting the right thing. That was one. So there was a reorganisation job. There was also the banks were very keen that me and my colleagues didn't leave.
Right.
Because if we left, we'd leave them with nothing.
Yeah.
Now, it had never crossed our mind, but it crossed their minds. So they put in various structures to get us to hang around, right? So they gave us, we had to pay to work a little bit. So we had to contribute some money.
Yeah.
And then they gave us some shares.
Yeah.
And gave us more shares than we paid for.
Yeah.
But they were subject to performance and all of that sort of stuff. So it got to the stage that the amount of money we put in was relatively small, but I got 24, 25 people from the business to invest in IBC. But in this particular instance, we were allowed, because we did okay, we were allowed to get along with it. We didn't have bankers on the board. We had a normal board of directors, and we were allowed eventually to buy a few bits and pieces. We were allowed to grow geographically, particularly the confidence business. So businesses in America and Australia and Singapore and Brazil and places like that all happened during this period.
Yeah.
So eventually we got to the stage of reducing the debt a bit, but increasing the profit a lot. And the market was better, the environment was better. So the bank said, look, this would be a good time, or our stockbrokers, whatever, this would be a good time to go to the banks and said, we'd like to raise some money on the stock market to pay you back.
Yeah.
And at the same time,
Yeah.
you will pay you back. You give us off whatever shares we had, and you write off the rest of your debt. So actually lose the debt. And all the time, that was the one thing they didn't want to do. They didn't want to have to write the debt off.
Right.
So this was because it would look bad and all that. And
Yeah.
it's more difficult. So we got to the stage that we were strong enough to discuss this with them. And about maybe 1996-ish, 6, say, that's when we did that. The banks disappeared, and it was our company, and we were able to motor on.
Yeah, I was going to say for people listening and some of the research I did, I remember from what some of the press said that when you took over the role, I think it was fair to say, and not saying your own fault, but it didn't go well at the beginning, right? You sort of touched on it a little bit here. That obviously from year to year it kind of went down a bit.
The point was, when the banks and it was me and the banks did the deal.
Yeah.
When we did the deal, and then I had to get it ratified, we were worth nothing. We were losing money, and there was no market capitalisation or stuff like that. So that was in the early 90s. So it was a bounce back from that.
To be where you were then, what do you do next, Peter? Because obviously, lots happened since then. We'll go into a bit more detail about some of the mergers and stuff. But you must have felt really under pressure at this point. You've been given this extra responsibility, there's a lot going on, and you've obviously had to survive in some way, and you built up from there on. But how was you feeling then? And did you still think at that point, I'm going to be doing this for the next 25 years? Like, how did you feel?
No, and funnily enough, I thought much the opposite to that. Subsequently, years later, thought, why the hell did I get kept on? Never mind stay on. But because what I didn't realise is that they felt that if I left, then the whole shooting match would fall apart, and they'd have no value left. I think. Do you know what we really? I had a real. They also, as well as getting rid of my predecessor, they also got rid of the finance director. So I had a good guy called Tony Cropper who came in as a finance director. Tony was what they call a workout man. So he'd work in difficult situations like this. So so Tony was actually our best man at our wedding. So
right.
We just, do you know what? We basically behaved normally.
Yeah.
We just had to set aside the debt and say, look, the way we'll really benefit, and everybody will benefit, with running it as a normal business and doing all the normal things. 5 years
later, moving onwards, through recessions, interest rates going crazy, thinking about all of that stuff, and now the business is operating as a profit. Looking back at it, what would you have done anything differently?
Firstly, it was great to get to that stage, because it was a stage that we didn't necessarily know we'd get to. Although I think we did think we'd get to it, because I think we thought we knew what we were doing. But there wasn't great euphoria. But I think we learned a lot. What we learned was, you talk about all those bad things, interest rates, recessions and stuff. Yeah. What we learned was it was worth having a good mix of businesses. It was good to have a geographical spread, because it was unusual if all countries were going to be in a recession at the same time. And also it was good to be in different verticals. So we had agriculture, we had finance, we had telecoms, we had maritime, we had the law, we had farms, life sciences and stuff like that. So I think that was a great lesson there, which I didn't necessarily know all the way before, that we slowly worked out that we could have like a three-dimensional matrix where you'd have products on one line, you'd have types of products on one, and you'd have geographies on another, and you could try to, the more of that you filled in the various intersection cells, the stronger your business was. And we didn't do that methodically, but we thought about it that way. And things like some of the deals we did later on were very much, they fitted into that strategy.
Yeah. Could you mind me asking you about some of the deals? So I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but obviously '98 was an important year. But was it because of the IBC and LLP merger, and then becoming
I thought
Informa?
you were going to tell me about some other things happening in 1998.
Oh no, I've done my bit. But there probably is something important. Then maybe I think Man United won the double, then didn't they, or something that year, or '99?
Almost certainly.
Yeah, but yeah, obviously that was a real big turning point in regards to that merger, when we then became called Informa PLC. Where did the name? Why were you called Informa PLC? And how important was it at that time that merger did happen?
You'll see that at that time we'd been quoted a long time. We'd been quoted since 1986. LLP, I think, were only quoted in 1998, and the first bit of for all sorts of reasons, the first bit of their life as a quoted business hadn't gone especially well. For nobody's fault, but it hadn't gone especially well. And I can't remember who it was, but somebody introduced David Gilbertson and me together, and we got on very well. We could see, he knew nothing about conferences, and he looked at us as a conference business with some publishing. Think about the last conversation. Yeah. And I didn't think he knew anything about conferences, but he knew something about publishing. And I thought, and we both did, that putting together a business that was 2/3 publishing, 1/3 events, with a company that was 1/3 publishing and 2/3 event, which was IBC, made a lot of sense, and it fitted in some of this huddling together to keep out of the cold time.
That did.
So, and of course the areas that we operated in were different. We were very strong at IBC by then in telecoms and life sciences and stuff, and LLP was strong, in some forms of the law, but in particularly in maritime and insurance because of Lloyd's List and stuff like that. Yeah. So, whilst it wasn't necessarily a match made in heaven, it was a good match.
It was good at the time.
It was a good time, and at that time, I think we were about 40% bigger than LLP. So in a way, it wasn't quite a merger of equals, although that's the way we looked at it. And David and I, as far as I'm concerned, always looked at it as a merger of equals, and that we were, although we had different titles and slightly different jobs, that we were equal.
For about 5 years, you guys sort of built that up, and then suddenly you started to become the Informa acquisition kings. Like 2003, PJB, the largest deal at that point. Why PJB, and what impact did this have?
1998 to 2002. That was almost as important as your 1989 date, because it really was when the web, internet, call it what you will, was coming along, and there were all sorts of crazy things happening. There were businesses appearing out of nowhere. There was other businesses being disintermediated by the people who were coming out of nowhere. There were some businesses that knew what they were doing with digital, which it was not called digital publishing then, it was called something else, whatever it was called. And David and I said, well, the great thing we've got is that we, at least the two of us, we can between us work out what we should do. We went to a famous conference on the internet. We had one guy, I'm not going to put any names or anything like that out. One guy said, he said, this is great. He says, what we're going to do is we're going to give all of our products away in the future. We're just going to put it online, and we won't get any money for it, but it's a good thing to do. And I don't know where that came from. And I remember David wrote on it, we were sitting together. We had to he made a presentation for his company. We were going to do one for Informa. And he wrote down, if this is how the world's going to be, we've had it. He didn't use we've had it, he used another word, but we couldn't run the business on that basis. So we got up and said, we're going to produce information like we always done. Content is king, and we'll provide it to people the way they want it. and which was always our mantra afterwards. And then, but prior to that, you're right, we had to choose a name, and we sat in a room. We had all these guys who were, who wanted us to spend a fortune on the branding exercise and stuff. And David and I just decided on Informa from that. One afternoon with a group of people, and it just, when we came upon it, it's sort of a bit of a Latin-y thing, I don't know. We just thought, yeah, that's absolutely right. That's what it is. So that's why it was. We didn't pay anybody any money. We didn't even pay ourselves any money for Dream.
Right.
Just PJB.
Yeah.
So Claire and I had been, but with Claire's help at times, had been pursuing PJB for such a long time, and because it seemed to work, because it had these great pharmaceutical brands, and I thought, if we can bring those pharmaceutical brands in, like Script and stuff like that, then we could graft on events. I used to think a lot like that. If we've got a great brand, that we could put an event or loads of events. But it was very hard tying Philip and Patricia Brown down. So it took many years and years and years and years until finally another dinner or whatever, we agreed that we'd.
Did you have to pay for the dinner? Is that what it was, Pete? You didn't pay for the other 5 dinners, and then as soon as you said, I'll buy this dinner, they were like, right, you've got a deal for PJB. Is that what it was?
I think I paid for all the we paid for all the dinners.
I'm joking. I know you're very generous. When you are looking at companies, on average, and I know it's going to be a wild open air question, how long does it on average take from you've got the post-it notes out, and you and David are sitting there going, let's go get PJB, or so I know it's a bit of a random way of saying this, but you know what I mean. Post-it notes. What are we going to do? What's our strategy? 5-year plan, etc. And PJB comes up on that list, right? What's the sort of, you mentioned the dinner process, but what else goes on behind the scenes, and the sort of, very simply, without going into like 18 hours, like you say, because there's a lot of detail to go into. But top line, what's needed to be done to kind of get this over the line and the build up to it?
Finding an available target, either because they're for sale, or you go to them and say, are you for sale? It's negotiating a deal. It's doing, there's lots of due diligence. So, you do legal due diligence, you do commercial due diligence, you do financial due diligence. You get, if you need to borrow money, you either have to go to the banks to borrow money, or you raise money on the stock exchange. Then, depending on whether you need to raise the money on the stock exchange, you have to get shareholder approval or not, and then you have to get your board approval, and they've got to do some of that same on their side. But if they're the target, they don't have to raise the money and stuff like that. So I'd say normally, and I don't suppose there is a normal, but it's about maybe 6 months.
Yeah,
that might be right. However, PJB, the actual last bit was probably maybe about 6 months. If you got loads of cash in the bank and you have to borrow money or raise money, it's a lot quicker, because that takes time to do.
Yeah.
If it's when we bought IIR from Irving Laidlaw, which was in 2004, was it, or 5?
2005, yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. So, because his was a conference company and ours was a conference company, and basically he decided at the outset that he didn't want to sell to IB to Informa, because it was 2 conference companies, and I think he wanted to look after staff and all of that sort of stuff, but he's not a soft-hearted businessman, he's a hard-hearted businessman, so he wanted to get a good deal. So what happened in that particular instance is that we were excluded from the process completely. So we didn't get the information memorandum, we didn't get any management presentations or anything like that, until one weekend, I can't remember what time of year it was, but whatever, on I think it was Friday, I spoke with him, and he said, I think I might even have rung him about the deal, but whatever. I said, could we be included in the deal? And he said, yes. And then much of the work was done in the next week for such a massive deal. So he set, because he said, you've got to catch up with everybody else. So we had management presentations, we had bank meetings. I spent the whole Sunday on the phone from PA where we live now, agreeing with him what the deal was going to be, how much it was going to be. And so he had his advisors, we had our advisors. Then on the Monday we flew out, met people in America, and then everywhere more or less. So we had to meet their management and stuff like that. So in about a week, we'd done most of the work, and we've got, I can't remember, it took a bit longer than that to do all the legal documentation and stuff like that, but the main, in that particular case that was done very fast, was in the merger with, and that was, if you remember, that was bringing in more events. Prior to that, we've done a merger which cost no money, because it was just swapping shares, as mergers usually are, with TNF.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
That took a bit longer to do that, because it was more complicated, much more. There's a lot more negotiation.
So with regard to Taylor Francis, our mate Roger, and their portfolio, because I was part of the journals and the healthcare. But what was that like? Something as big as that, and then everything, the name changed, and what was that feeling like at that point?
You know what? They a bit like the deal between IBC and LLP. It evolved in various discussions that it seemed a good idea to put the two businesses together. Unlike IBC and LLP, though, Informa and Taylor and Francis were completely different sorts of businesses. They had some similarities in terms of the subscription bit of journals, but it sort of stopped there. So it was a harder negotiation, because people ascribed higher values to the TNF profits than they did to the profits of a hopeless B2B publisher like Informa. So if you imagine, if you're doing a merger, you have to agree who's going to have the biggest share of the pie. Yeah. So if you think you've got 100 shares, somebody's going to end up with more than the other, unless it's 50-50. So if you're arguing about how much the profits worth, it's harder to get to the agreement. And I can't remember what we ended up, whether it was 52-48 or something like that. That took forever, right? And it was. And what happens is that the negotiation happens outside, usually with stockbrokers and banks, rather than between Dave Smith and me, because Dave was the CEO at that time. But in a funny way, and I've always believed that, once the deal's done, and and some of the shareholders are the same. The shareholders for LLP were the same as the shareholders for Informa. Whether like the Prudential or whoever it happens to be. So once the deal's done, it doesn't matter what the share of the cake. They call it the share of the cake. Nobody cares. It's just you just move on. And the hard things are agreeing the terms and then agreeing what everybody is going to do.
So Peter, I work in sales, right, and I'm doing deals. Probably the best deal I've done, probably 300 or 400k, and I am like it's Christmas. I'm absolutely buzzing. I'm like, I celebrate. But you're doing something on an unbelievable scale. What do you do when that deal's done? Everything's signed. You've got the email. Everything's come through, and everything's done. What do you do? What happened? What's your evening and then your next day like?
I think the next day is spent. It'd be great to be flippant, saying out and drunk and do, but in fact, it's in each case. The most important thing is to get everybody on side. So you can imagine IIR. I spent ages talking to people like Deborah Chipman and Ros Oxley, who were part and parcel of the main team there. And they desperately didn't want to be part of Informa. What they wanted to be is sold to private equity people and to make some money. And so they were disappointed from a financial perspective, and they didn't know where they were going to end up with the jobs. With all of them, though, you basically have to go around and do these town halls. You go to, as we were doing TNF, you were moving from the middle of London to Abingdon.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's right.
Milton Park.
Yeah.
You know? And so it was, so you had to go and do that, and sometimes, and you knew on occasion you were going into a hostile environment, and you also knew, particularly with TNF, that they knew a lot more about that business than we do.
Yeah.
We knew nothing about it, and it must have been quite a big shock, because I would imagine that they thought, well, if we're going to be sold, we'll be sold to Wiley, or we'll be sold to Springer or something like that. Yeah. So you've got to cross over that barrier. Now, I used to think that the culture within Informa was good enough.
Yeah.
Most of the time, for people, even if they were sceptical at the start, to come over. So my by the way, still the whole focus of me from a business perspective, and what I look for people is energy, or enthusiasm, and if they got that, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
You see it straight away with people. If you're recruiting somebody, straight away that they've got, and so I thought that they could see that we were enthusiastic, we had lots of energy, we would put our out, and eventually, Dave Smith, who done the deal, so he became chairman. I think I had been chairman. Titles. Dave became MD. I became CEO. Roger Horton moved and became CEO of, and Roger and I are still big mates, and he's a good lad.
Love Roger.
I'm not sure he's not as good a goalie as you.
No.
I mean, I saw Roger recently, and we speak quite a lot actually. No. But I got to, despite that, I'm not from academic publishing. I got to know the guys like Rog, like John Connors there, like who was sort of, I suppose, slightly sidelined by this time. But the whole lot of them, got to be mates. And you almost think you're mates. You're not really mates necessarily, but it's almost like being mates, that you can, not only have a board meeting, but you can talk about Reading or
other stuff.
So I thought it was really crucial to us, that, because it changed. I mean the merger, because it changed the business completely, because it brought in a real hub that was subscriptions and resilience and high margin and lasts forever and high value too, that probably the events business and some of the other subscription advertising businesses never had. I think it's proven to be that. There's been, investors say, okay, it's a bit boring. But it's not. It's not really boring, because it's always grown. It might not have grown as much as an events business in the good time, but the good times, like through the pandemic, disappeared.
Yeah, it did.
But the academic publishing stays pretty well in there.
So 2008 was probably a big challenging year for you. Obviously, not challenging because of we'll talk about David in a second, but you did do another big merger, another big acquisition with Data Monitor. And again, I'm only going by what I've read. There was obviously quite a lot of negativity from what I've read back then about the deal and Mike Danton being the winner and that kind of stuff. What's your kind of recollection of that? And was that something that was, again, paper talk or news and stuff that
it was, but it wasn't a great deal, because it probably to some extent, I think it had possibly been dressed up for sale,
right,
in the sense that it was probably overvalued. More difficult because some of the senior people left, like Mike, relatively quickly
and set up another company, Global Data.
And they did, and that's always difficult when people do that. I'm not saying they broke any contractual things, but because I can't remember if they did or they didn't, but I don't think they did.
No.
But that made it a bit hard. But on the other hand, there were great products in there, and some of those products are still part of the group now. Do you know what? We always had a board,
right,
for Informa, whatever the name of the company had to be. Do you know, it went from Informa to TNF Informa, back to Informa again. All of that was some sort of negotiation. But we never ever. I've always thought that if you're going to get on as a board, if somebody doesn't want to do it, you don't do it.
Yeah.
You only do it if everybody agrees with it, because how do you carry on afterwards? I think it's so we never had votes about.
Right. Okay.
Not, there might have been some nuances, but we didn't have votes because we didn't need votes. We knew where everybody stood, and you know what? It was probably true that the board, basically, because I'd done really well on my own, and then David and I had done really well together.
Yeah.
They probably trusted our judgment on this thing.
Talk about David Gilbertson, EMAP. You know what I'm saying? He's probably always your partner in crime.
I think in the 7 or 8 years that we worked together, it's more than that, probably 9 years, that it was like a good partnership, and we both had things to contribute. David, as far as I'm concerned, wanted an opportunity to be in charge on his own. He wanted to be a CEO, and I completely respect that. Yeah. And I do now. I'm disappointed that we didn't stick together, but I also understand why he did that, and he went to EMAP, and as it happened, it didn't work out that well. But that was partly because of it was mostly because of the crash around 2008, 2009, because I'm sure it would have been a different outcome otherwise. So, you know what? We're mates. We speak on the phone. We see each other every now and then. So it's not like there's animosity, but I understand why he went. But I'd have liked to continue. I always thought it was a bit like Clough and Taylor. I think the managers. I think the two of them sort of, and who was it? Mercer and Allison at City, even years before that. To have partnerships is quite good, because otherwise it's quite lonely. So because you're on your own. So Adam. Well, just about the time that David left, Adam Walker became CFO because Tony Foyt left, and so Adam became my sounding board, because you can't not have a sounding board. And I had good chairmen along the way, like Derek Mapp, and prior to that others as well. So do you know who was my last chairman at IBC?
Who's that?
Lord William Rees-Mogg, so Jacob's dad.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and look, William came to our wedding actually, and he was a great supportive chairman. I could go and talk to him. Yeah, I've always been lucky with that. So I never met Jacob, but I did know William very well.
Us at Informa at that time would love to be a fly on the wall. 7,000 of us want to say, what does that conversation go like?
Yeah, it was. I think it's fair to say it was. There were two conversations, if I remember rightly. One was an initial, this is what I'm probably going to do, I think, and then a follow-up one. That was, I am doing it, but I think it's a long time ago, and you forget some of the words, but I'm pretty sure that David made it clear that he wanted to be top man, and we had a discussion. We had this one-way discussion, but actually, I said, "Well, why don't you be top man?" And he said, "Don't be stupid, because you have to be running this business." Yeah. So the original discussion wasn't necessarily, "Oh, I've got," and maybe he didn't, but I'm going to go somewhere else. It was, one or the other of us has to run this business, and that's the way he.
But on that, Peter, though, if that did happen, I know obviously you must be keen to stay together because of, and then like you say, you're working very like by like anyway as a team. But what do you think would have been? How different do you reckon that last 4 or 5 years would have been if it would be the other way around?
Absolutely, no idea.
It's like the sliding doors moment, isn't it? It could have been like a year later.
I've wondered whether we'd done, we both agreed, for example, along the way that we should own or try to own UBM.
Yeah.
So although we failed twice doing that, it was something that Stephen did not that long after he'd taken over from me, because it was a logical thing to add that business in, and it although as it happened, of course it's not, because it's been really badly harmed by the pandemic and not
Yeah.
having any events for 2 years. But that will change.
Yeah.
The opportunities that came along in the period from when David joined EMAP
Yeah.
to when I left would sort of come along, and we'd have done some of them. We would have not done others of them, and that was always the case. I mean, for example, we did. I think one of the best deals that I ever did, I did just as before I left, which was for us to buy the China Beauty Show in Shanghai, and that has grown like mad. It's probably been the highest growth of anything we ever had.
Right.
And so we continue to do stuff. The crash happened in 2009. So suddenly, I remember you met Will Morris that ran the FB.
Yeah.
So Will and I sat down one day with the so-called. We were away. We'd had dinner. Perhaps we were in Asia. I think we had a beer mat, and he said, "Look, what do you think is going to happen to conferences in this environment? Just they're all going to crash." So he said, "So what do you think we should do?" And I said, "Well, look, I think," we both agreed, we should buy exhibitions, and we should, we should try now before conferences hit the bottom. Or we know they're going to hit the bottom, maybe go beneath the bottom. Let's find an alternative. So Will and I worked very closely to build the exhibitions business, and we had some stuff out of IIR, like the Monaco Yacht Show, particularly, and a couple of other things in Asia. But we bought a business in Canada, we bought a business in Brazil, we bought that business and a couple more in China. And
Peter,
so the exhibition business that eventually has now grown. So we had Arab Health, that's right, which is Dubai. We had all the stuff in Dubai, but some of that came out of most of that came out of IIR.
Yeah.
But that strategically was really crucial because it got us out of a hole that wasn't of our making necessarily with the recession, but made us into a trade show business and made the whole thing about UBM far more sort of technical and sensible. The most complicated deal was IIR.
Right.
Because I had to, as I said, we had a Sunday at home on the telephone, speaking to bankers, speaking to Irvin, speaking to Chris Mabry, who was his number two, lawyers, our board, all sorts of people, agreeing a deal. And there's all sorts of tricks for that in terms of how, not tricks, but to get to that situation was complicated. Then, because we had to beat the other bids on the table, because it's not going to tell me what the other bids are on the table, except one of our advisors said you should ask him to get him to send you a letter with the name of the buyer off it, but with a number on it, and that's what happened. So
wow.
So we did that, and I thought it was incredible advice from a real professional. But I would never have been brave enough to do that because I just thought it told me. So and then once that Sunday had gone on, Chris had gone to America or somewhere. Chris Mabry, this other guy, he'd gone to New York, I think. Then in a week, and then after the week, I just full time had to put the two businesses together to work out who was going to run, whether we were going to merge them in a town or a country, or we were going to have an IBC brand or the Informa brand. We still had IBC. As well. And so we had we were competitive in, I think it was certainly in the UK, in America, in Australia, in Singapore, lots of places we had two offices, and then other places we had single offices. As I think we had two offices in Germany. That was the hardest one a lot. Two offices in two life sciences offices. So this was like how I had to go through all this and work out which ones to keep, who to let go and see them, deal with it properly, and end up with a hopefully as good a business having done all of that once we've done that process. And I'm really proud of how that turned out.
Yeah, so you should be. Before you retired at the end of 2013, you did restructure Informa to be a tax resident in Switzerland, and you had to effectively move there. I understand why you did it, but how was it like spending a sort of percentage of your time in Switzerland?
Yeah, it's a good question. It doesn't always come out in the media, but why we did it was because we were being hammered by being taxed twice.
Yeah.
Once in the country where the profits were, and secondly back in the UK. Not all the time, but it depended on double tax treaties and stuff. So we were advised to go, and we were also advised, by we use banks and the tax people and auditors, and they said if we got for this to be effective, there has to be proper management in Switzerland rather than fly in and fly out, have a name on a door. So it was a proper operation. I'm not sure everybody did it fully. Properly. I'm actually not sure that advice was 100% accurate.
Right.
Subsequently, because I've seen it done differently, although lots of companies went to Ireland, Tarsus went to Ireland, they absolutely did it properly in Ireland. It was great to have the opportunity once in my life to live somewhere different, because it makes you, even though I couldn't speak a word of Swiss German, but it was great from that perspective. We had all the problems of girls who were 9 and 11 leaving their mates and going there for so it was a guarantee that it would be for a particular period of time, but we had to take them out of school, put them in schools there, but they've made friends there. The friends they made in Switzerland, they've still got some of them, and they still see, but they were all, but you know what, I think given our age, my age anyway, it was a really interesting experience. And by the way, for anybody who wants to go, but by and large, if we went, so if Adam and I were going to Brazil, we'd go together to Brazil on the same plane and all that. So we spent a lot of time at airports getting to know one another. And we stayed friends
ever since. Yeah.
But why wouldn't you? I mean,
you should do.
I don't know any reason. I hate people who say, well, they're not my friend anymore, because I just can't see. Life's too short in it.
Yeah, no, it is. No, I've you've got to
have enemies. Forget friends, which never worth having enemies.
No, exactly. So you 2013, you retire at the end of 2013. You mentioned earlier about the retirement, and you felt like you
holidays everywhere.
That's it. You obviously felt like you wanted to. It was the right time to leave.
I thought it was about losing energy, actually, Scott.
Energy.
Because I think the job needed somebody on the road almost every day. And it wasn't everybody. Oh, it must be great being on the road every day.
No, it's not. It's not.
So, but it needs energy. You need to wake up the next morning at 5 if you're home and say, right, I'm getting a taxi at past, and then it happens the next day, and then you're sleeping in another bed. So it needs. I just didn't want. I've always been fit. I've always run. I've always done the sport, and I didn't want to end up not being able to do the job properly, because I think lots of people hang on by the skin of the teeth, and I don't think.
No, I think you. The way you left as well, I thought was amazing as well. And actually, you've answered the question I had earlier about how you what kind of keeps you motivated and stuff. Because I've been with you when we've played football or played cricket, and then you've been there for an hour, and then you're getting driven straight to the airport and you're going somewhere else. And the way your life, and I've seen your driver there, I can't remember his name, he used to be waiting for you. Jason, that was it. Be waiting for you. You'll be literally in, you're in and out, but you plan it in such a way, but you were always on the go, and I can understand, at that point.
You know what? I had my farewell dinner at Lord's Cricket Club.
I was there. I was about to say, you invited me, actually. I felt very special, by the way, and I will say this because out of all the things, of all the people, the thousands of people you employed, or part of under the umbrella of Informa, I felt very, honestly, Pete, I've never said this to you, I felt so privileged and honoured that you'd even consider me on that list. I don't know if Louise did the list and you didn't know about it, but joking aside, I was on that list. That's it. And I've got to say, it was amazing.
Somewhere I've got that, but I don't know where that.
I've actually found the video that they there's on there that obviously brights up. And obviously that was, and then there's like a a video where someone's playing cricket. You're not actually playing, but then it's like a cricket. Then they show the 30 not out of this sort of 5-minute video. But it was absolutely amazing. And I have to say, Peter, for all the years that I knew you there, and obviously I know that I was a pain in the backside because I'd come to you every couple of months and go, Peter, can we go to play the football tournament here, or can I organise cricket? And every time I asked you, basically, and obviously I'd always make it related to something like charity. You'd always say yes. So that was my tactic. Obviously I never come to you and go, Pete, can I go to tournament? I'd always come in with but I have to say, so I'm waffling here a little bit, but I have to say you were really supportive on the sort of sports side, social side, and everybody that that were part of those days and stuff. They always come over to me and say thank me obviously for organising it, but always were very that is amazing how they'll come along to that event. They get the sandwiches, food, and most of the time a good few hours of drinks paid for, which I don't know if you do that bit. I might have hid that under the cost a little bit, but I hid it under somewhere. But no, I wanted to thank you for that. And actually, again, I was going to talk about the being invited because for me, because you had a lot of people that you would have probably considered that have had more of an impact, I guess, in your career. So to come along to that. I was the youngest person there, I think, as well. So it was actually really felt really weird. I didn't know how to feel, but I remember going home and I remember saying to Holly, I was like, I've just been invited to this amazing function. And I've never been to this place before. I'm around all these people that obviously I hear their names and, these big dogs, as I would call them, Informa. And I'm that little person that, back at Singer Street, working in PJB or whatever it was then. And I've been invited to it. I just felt, I wanted to thank you for that.
Off Pat, but I thought the people that worked for Informa, almost all that I knew were nice people. And I used to think, and I mean, nice people don't like the word all the time, but I just thought they were decent, proper people. Yeah. And I actually think that people who came to Informa that didn't fit into that category didn't stay very long.
No, you're right.
Their faces didn't fit. I don't mean they necessarily got sacked, but they just faces did. And I think that's the, if you sort of wanted to say, what would you make, forgetting the deal bit, what would make you proud? I think it would be having a great place to work that people enjoy going to work. But I would say that once I left, I was offered lots of jobs, full-time jobs, and I said, I've just left the best job in the world.
If you were to give anybody advice, right, looking back and wanting to be a CEO, what advice would you give?
About 3 things, if that's all right. I'd say be yourself.
Yeah.
I'd say be ambitious and be energetic.
You have left Informa in 2013. What have you been up to since you've been Informa?
Do you know what? So from not wanting to do anything and thinking I'd have time to do lots of other things, I've done some non-executive work. I'm on the board of 4 companies now. So a company called MVF, which is a digital sales lead source business. I'm on the board of Tarsus, which is an exhibition business. I'm on the board of Populous, which is an architectural business that does sports stadia like Spurs and things like that, which is pretty cool. And I'm on the board of a private publishing company that's very much like an early IBC called Mark Allen Group. And I just do those as non-executives. Sometimes I'm chairman, sometimes I'm just on the board, and they take me each a couple of days a month. And the rest of the time is dog walking, tennis.
How do you want to be remembered, Peter?
I don't know. Do you know, I was listening to somebody talk about this the other day about, I don't think it's legacy, because I don't think that's important. I.e. what you leave behind. I think I'd like, if anything, I'd like to be remembered as somebody that people felt did his best and did his best for the people that worked with him.
Yeah. Everybody has been exactly what you just kind of said there, that you've had an impact on everybody's kind of like career or life, and not just in their work environment, but also sort of from a personal point of view. So I have to say, before we go, you've had an impact on my life. Some of the opportunities you've given me to be able to meet certain people, and the people that I still kind of like will have conversations with now. So I want to thank you, by the way, for even since you've left Informa, you've sort of kept in touch occasionally and ask how I was doing, and I'm doing the DJ and stuff. That's a little plug here for
I
me.
do know. I don't know what that means. do you know what I wanted to say? Just to finish that last point. Although I don't count it as legacy, what's really amazing is that I've now been left 9 years, and I get people from Informa, ex-Informers as well as current, and people in the city who, when I say who I am, where I'm from, they know. And I'm not arrogant enough to have thought that would be the case, but I'm, in a funny way, I think it's nice, because they say I've always wanted to meet you, and I think great, these, and some guys now who I worked with years and years ago, out of Informa, bankers and stuff, are now very senior, and I'm talking to one recently, and he said, we met when I was a bank carrier, as they call themselves, 35 years ago, and I said, I've no idea.
Well, you're Mr. Informa for me personally, and I'm happy to say this on record that I don't think Informa's been the same since you've left. Obviously, I've left, a lot later, but I have to say you are Mr. Informa, and you changed people's lives, you've changed the business, you turned it around from being a few million quid to 3 billion quid. That is unbelievable. When I put that out there to people that didn't know you, they were like, wow, I want to listen to this podcast, because that's why I wanted to ask you so many questions. This has been Peter Rigby, Mr. Informa.